As we transition from Black History Month to Women's History Month, I want to talk a little bit about misogyny in Black films, starting with the Blaxploitation era and specifically the 1971 classic Shaft. Shaft is such a notable Blaxploitation film because it's one of the first instances where a Black character is allowed to occupy the space that's usually reserved for a white guy. There's 10,000 Sam Spade or James Bond or white guy detective movies, and Shaft is subversive in the fact that it allows a Black man to take that space. However, it falls into the same sort of misogynistic tropes that many of those other detective films fall into. Specifically, there's a moment in this Shaft film where Shaft has sex with a white woman and then proceeds to kind of treat her like crap. You can tell that the movie wants you to applaud Shaft and to believe that there's something political and subversive about this moment of a Black man asserting his agency over a white woman. But in all actuality, no trope has really been subverted because at the end of the day, Shaft is still a man who's treating a woman he just had sex with like crap. It's just putting a Black face on the same sort of white supremacist and misogynistic tropes that you see in all these other films. And this is a common pattern that you see in a lot of other Black films. As the Blaxploitation era continued, it would soon coincide with the rise of the women's rights movement. And sooner rather than later, you would have Black women voices who would critique many of these movies for their misogynistic portrayals. But despite the fact that this criticism was coming from within the Black community, many Black male filmmakers took it as a racist attack. And things would soon come to a head in the 1980s when an extremely controversial book turned film premiered. Of course, I'm talking about The Color Purple from 1985, which is based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel of the same name written by Alice Walker. When the novel and the movie eventually came out, both were met with a lot of criticism from Black men who felt as if the characters Albert and Harpo were perpetuating racist stereotypes about Black men being rapists and monsters. However, this criticism fails to take into account the fact that many Black women have lived these experiences that are had by Celie in The Color Purple, and that many Black women have encountered men like Albert and Harpo in our lives. In my opinion, The Color Purple, the book, and all its adaptations are extremely nuanced depictions on the connections between racism and misogyny, and how misogyny is perpetuated in Black communities. Further, the book and all its adaptations have a redemption arc for the characters like Harpo and Albert. But despite what I see, many Black men and Black filmmakers saw The Color Purple as an attack on Black men, and they responded in kind. Spike Lee was one of these filmmakers. He's gone on the record and specifically said that his debut independent film, She's Gotta Have It from 1986, is meant to be a response to The Color Purple. And I really do wish many journalists had pushed back on this and forced him to explain more, because I really want to understand his reasoning. In She's Gotta Have It, we follow a young woman named Nola Darling. She refused to be owned by any single partner, and because of that, she's not really monogamous. She has 3 guys on her roster that she's seeing, but she can't really decide between any of them, and honestly, I get it. None of them are actually great. But what has made this movie so controversial is the fact that in the movie, there's a graphic sexual assault scene where one of the characters, who we're led to believe is a nice guy, sexually assaults Nola to assert his power over her. The controversy surrounding this essay scene in She's Gotta Have It in many ways has tainted the legacy around this film, and because of that, Spike Lee has since apologized about including the scene in the film, but it still makes you wonder, why was it included in the film in the first place? Especially when you consider the fact that this movie is meant to be a response to The Color Purple. And although Spike Lee has gotten a lot of flack for this scene in She's Gotta Have It, he is by far not the only Black filmmaker with a misogyny problem, on or off the set. Because while I love many films directed by John Singleton, including Poetic Justice from 1993, starring Janet Jackson and Tupac, I can never really separate this movie from the fact that John Singleton perpetuated a terrible rumor about Janet Jackson for 20 plus years. Because for years, there was this rumor that definitely had been accepted as fact, that Janet Jackson had demanded that Tupac take an AIDS test or she wouldn't film the kissing scenes with him for the movie Poetic Justice. This was a rumor that, especially as time went on, made Janet Jackson seem anti-Black and all-out ignorant. But it wasn't until 2017, 20 plus years after the movie Poetic Justice even came out, that John Singleton would clear the air and say that this was just an inside joke that had just become too big. But partially, it had become too big because John Singleton had allowed it to go on. He could have cleared the air for years and just didn't. This is the sort of casual misogyny that definitely happens to women all the time, and this is just a large example of it, where rumors about women that definitely harm our reputation and make us look a certain way in the public light get spread, and the men in our lives who could clear them up just don't. But at the same time, I think it's very easy for us to point out the misogyny that we see in men's films like Spike Lee and John Singleton, whereas people have been more reluctant to point out the blatant misogyny in the works of another black male filmmaker, specifically Tyler Perry. I think this movie, Tyler Perry's The Family That Prays, is one of the best examples of how misogyny works in his films specifically. If you're not familiar with Tyler Perry's movie, The Family That Prays, you might not know that Sanaa Lathan's character in this movie is a terrible person. She's been having an affair with her married boss for the past few years, and she's been passing off the product of said affair, her son, as her husband's child, a husband that she generally treats like crap. And in the climax of this movie, when her husband finds out the truth about her, he backhand slaps her so hard that she falls across a countertop. And I'll never forget this moment because when I saw this movie the first time in the theaters, I remember people in the audience clapping and laughing and enjoying the moment. And it was burned right then in that moment into my little baby brain that this movie, this character had been constructed such a way by Tyler Perry that people who generally abhor domestic violence are now clapping and applauding it because they think this character is such a terrible woman that she deserves to be hit by her husband. And this whole bad girl must get punished code of ethics is very common in Tyler Perry's films. And it's interesting because unlike filmmakers from the 1940s and 50s, he's not forced to do this because of the Hays Code. He just does it because he can. And obviously, this is not the only way in which misogyny presents itself in Tyler Perry's movies. Because many, many media scholars have written already at length about Tyler Perry's Medea or Martin Lawrence's Big Mama, or Eddie Murphy's infamous Rasputia character, are just caricatures of black women. They're takes on the Mamie trope, and despite what many people like Cat Williams think, I don't think these characters are meant to emasculate the black man so much as they are meant to insult black women. But these are just some of my observations, and this isn't to say that I've never enjoyed any of the movies made by some of these filmmakers, because I have, and I probably still will. It's just that as a woman, I can't help but notice when something misogynistic happens in a movie, and it kinda takes you out for a couple of seconds. And I think that this is a very common experience that a lot of women have when watching films. So I'd love to know from other women, when's a time you were watching a movie and really enjoying yourself, and then something misogynistic was said or done, and then you remembered, oh yeah, my favorite man who made this movie is still just a man.